South Alabama knocks off Troy. It's Locked On Sunbelt.
You are Locked On Sunbelt, your daily podcast on the Sunbelt Conference, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Dave Schultz, Locked On Sunbelt, your team every day. Thanks so much for joining us on this glorious Friday. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. All right, we'll do basketball. A little bit of a slow news day in the Sunbelt for a little bit of a change football-wise. I mean, overall, there are a bunch of transfers outside of the Sunbelt, I'm sure in the Sunbelt, although I think we got some TJ Finley news, actually, maybe. And then the big news later on in the evening was Bill O'Brien leaving the Patriots and heading to Ohio State. That should be fun. All right, that doesn't really concern us. That's another podcast. We'll go over ODU blowing out Marshall. Did not see that one coming. And we'll preview Saturday's Sunbelt hoops action as well. But one of the things we've talked about on the podcast, and I am a big believer of it, it's hard to win on the road. Not one team on Thursday won on the road. All right. ODU was 0-5. Now, they've lost a couple of 20-point leads in that, so they were good enough to get those. They weren't good enough to hang on. They were not, but they are not better than Marshall, at least not so far this year, and yet they won in a blowout. Georgia Southern was going to lose. Georgia Southern at home was down all second half. They had a lead when the second half began and basically when the game ended. Otherwise, they were trailing the whole second half, and yet they won. Troy comes into the Mitchell Center in Mobile, 5-0. They're going to play 10 to 12 to 14 guys, whatever it may be. And South Alabama's going to play 7 or 8. And outside of a 3-minute stretch to begin the ball game where Troy was up 3-0, South Alabama was in control for most of the ball game. They barely trailed in the first half. They did fall behind for 30 seconds in the second half, but they had an early 10-point lead in the second half. They had a 13-point lead in the second half and had to hold on at the end. But it's just really hard. The fans, whatever, these guys are generally kids. They're, somewhere between, I'm not sure if we're counting 21-year-old men kids, but, it's tough to win on the road. It's tough to win on the road professionally. That's why you get 3 points-ish when it's on the road, and depending on the home field advantage, you may get more. So let's talk about this South Alabama Troy basketball game, because it was a whale of a basketball game. That South Alabama had a lead. They built a 10-point lead, by the way, without their leading scorer, Isaiah Gator, scoring. They were up 39-29. And Gator had 0 points. His first points of the game was a 3-pointer, gave him 42. He had 0 points in the first half, 13 in the second half, and they needed every single one of them. Turbo Jones got off to a great start. He scored 9 early points. Let's see what he finished with. Turbo, the former Auburn guard, scored a 17. Tabe is the one who led the way. He had 19 points, 7 of 14 from the floor. Christian Eugene, as usually is the case, he leads Troy with 18 points. He was also 7 of 14 from the floor. But the Jaguars got contributions from almost everybody. Ormiston had a nice baseline drive. He had 6 points. Howell, the ULM transfer, he had 10 points. Smurf Melander, he had 6 points. Brown had 3, although he missed a few free throws. You gotta hit those free throws. But he grabbed 6 rebounds, including a big offensive one down the stretch. So, again, South Alabama led for most of the ball game. think they led for most of the first half. That's why it's so hard. And Troy shot abysmally in the first half. They were awful. Troy actually led 19-16 in the first half after leading 3-0. But South Alabama took a 5-point lead into halftime. They built it up to be 39-29. And here comes Troy. Troy went on a, what was it? It was, what does it say? 46 something. They went on a big run because they made it 45 all. So what's that? That's a 16-6 run for the Trojans. They did take on a pair of free throws. They took a 49-48 lead, but then here comes South Alabama. They made it 55-50, and they went up 13, 66-53, but Troy wouldn't go away. They hit a couple of big free throws. There's one turnover, or a couple of big three-pointers, back-to-back three-pointers. Then there's a turnover, and all of a sudden, a 13-point game is a 5-point game. And I'm not sure they got any closer than that, except at the end. They got it to be a 4-point game, 70-66, 72-68. South Alabama ran out of timeouts. They ran out of timeouts. I think midway through the second, or not quite midway through the second half, but because Troy was playing so many guys and South Alabama wasn't, I think Richie Riley took a timeout because his team was winded. I think at the 13-minute mark, 13-and-a-half-minute mark, he took a timeout because the team was tired. And then Howell, trying to get the ball in bounds, was either going to get a 5-second call or was going to step inbounds, and he called the last timeout. They didn't have any more timeout. The last timeout that they had was, I think, at the 4-minute mark. The South Alabama was out of timeouts early. In fact, they got a break on a sideline call for a review to check it out. I thought Troy was going to call a timeout, which would have been a mistake because they don't have any timeouts. But that's a big win for South Alabama. That sets up a huge ball game on Saturday. All of a sudden, these two teams are hot. South Alabama was 1-3, and the Cajuns were 1-3, and now all of a sudden they are each 3-3. So you can be towards the top half of the conference with a win to go to 4-3, or be towards the bottom half of the conference with a loss at 3-4. And so that'll be a big ball game on Saturday at the Mitchell Center. I don't think I'm going to go. It's interesting. You go for a football game, but why wouldn't I go for a basketball game? That doesn't seem to make much sense, but maybe because there's an NFL ball game. I could do that. I may end up ending up doing that. Just spend the night in Mobile. No big deal. So that'll be a big ball game. Troy, let's see where Troy ends up. They lose for the first time in the Sun Belt. They're 5-1. They're a good team. I have always appreciated and enjoyed Scott Cross's teams. They did not go away. They'll play Saturday afternoon at Southern Miss. And I would say that would depend if Victor Hart and Andre Curbelo play, but that didn't matter the other night because it's hard to win on the road. All right, let's take a timeout. We will talk about that ODU basketball game and the rest of the Sun Belt. JMU from Thursday. JMU with an easy win, except if you had the 19.5 points. Ouch. Let me tell you a little bit about FanDuel. The NFL regular season has wrapped up, but there's still plenty of time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. The app is so easy to use. There's so many different ways to bet, like live same-game parlays. Find bets in the new Explore tab. Make a parlay in the Parlay Hub, the best way to find popular parlays, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. All right, Dave Schultz, Locked On Sunbelt, your team every day. We'll get to the FanDuel portion of the show here momentarily, but I get what got into ODU. Okay. I certainly did not see this coming. I would have picked Marshall to win it and to cover, and they were winning. Marshall had a 38-34 halftime lead, and then ODU explodes for 57 points in the second half. Explodes. ODU shot an off-the-chart 68% in the second half. They shot better. Well, they shot better from the floor than the free throw line. They were 23 of 34, 67.6%. From the free throw line, they shot 45%. Not that matters. In fact, they only shot 50% for the game, 7 for 14. But maybe, and again, it was just a thought the other day. Now that, I want to say there's a resolution, but the players have been updated on Jeff Jones's health situation, and they talked about it, and they could see their coach, and hopefully he'll be okay. Maybe that was his way of saying, hey, guys, I'm going to go do this. I'm going to take care of me. You guys need to take care of this. All right. And maybe that, again, just clears their head just a little bit. Because when you know something and you can talk to them, that maybe puts your mind at ease. Maybe that's what it is a little bit. All right. It was an emotional meeting. We appreciate, kids really how much they like their coach and how much he means to them. And so maybe, just maybe, right? I still took Marshall. I'm not going to stay away from that. But maybe, just maybe, it gave them a little bit ease of mind. They certainly shot the lights out. I mean, that's amazing. That's a ridiculous, also helps that Marshall only shot, they only shot 34% for the game, 25% in the second half. A lot of that may be heaving threes to get back into it. Only 2 for 18 in the second half from three. So a great job by ODU. Alette had 27 points, one of 5 players in double figures. Jenkins, 16. Williams, 13. Blakeney and Baker each had 12. For Marshall, Keelan with 21, and Martin and Kerfman each had a 12. So Marshall, starting out 4-0 in the Sun Belt, they're now 4-2. Old Dominion improves to 1-5. All right. Before we get to, let's do the ULM or the ULM James Madison one. We'll wrap up the segment with the Georgia Southern win. James Madison, an easy win. They got off to a little bit of a slow start. Very early. ULM had a lead, but JMU led by 12 at half. They go on for the relatively easy 89-70 victory over ULM. James Madison had lost 2 of 3. They improved to 4-2. ULM drops to 0-6. Here's the thing. Speaking of FanDuel, James Madison, the line was 19.5. Thought that was a lot. James Madison, they were up by 31. I can't say that I would have taken the 19.5 and I would have lost. They were up 31 points, 85-54 with 3:26 left to go. And then ULM started to score. Ouch. 14-3 run over the last 2:49. That's a bummer if you have JMU and a 19.5. I guess if you got 19, it was a push. And if you got 18.5, you won. But boy, if you lost in a ball game that James Madison had a 31-point lead with 3.5 minutes to go, that's why they call it gambling. That one hurts. But an easy win for James Madison. Let's see what they have next. I do not know off the top of my head. We were looking at, there we go. Let's see. They get Marshall. So Marshall, after starting 4-0, could be looking at a 3-game losing streak. We'll see if Marshall bounces back. Again, tough to win on the road, and this one will be in Harrisonburg. All right, let's get to that Coastal Carolina, Georgia Southern ball game. Georgia Southern actually was leading at half, 34-30. But Coastal Carolina just led all second half. And, I mean, they made a three-pointer in the first minute to take the lead, and they didn't relinquish it until the last 30 seconds of the game. Let's see what their biggest lead was. Because let's see here. Split box. Coastal's largest lead actually was 9 points with 12 minutes to go. They were in control, 51-42. And, I mean, just it felt like I was watching the South Alabama game and yet watching the score, and Coastal was just winning. And then all of a sudden, I guess it was a 3-point game, and I looked away, and all of a sudden, Georgia Southern won. So it was let's see what we got here. Georgia Southern cut that 9-point lead down to 2 with 6 minutes to go, 60-58. Coastal Carolina got it back to 66-58. Then it got to 66-64. They pulled within 1 at 66-65. So it's a ball game. They just couldn't get over the top until the end. All right. So Georgia Southern makes a couple of free throws to pull within 1. Coastal hits a layup. They make it a 70-67 ball game. Tyron Moore with what says to be a step back 3 ties the ball game up at 70 with 1:13 to go. So that's the first time they've been even tied in the second half. And then let's see here. Nate Bradford hits 1 of 2 free throws, and then Coastal misses, and then Georgia Southern hits 2 free throws and puts the game away. So again, Georgia Southern led right at half. In the first minute of the second half, Coastal Carolina took the lead until the 26-second mark. Nate Bradford made a free throw. In fact, he makes the second free throw. He missed the first free throw. He hits the second free throw, and Georgia Southern with a win. They get their third win. They're now 3-3, right? Remember, they started out 0-12. The 0-12 doesn't mean anything. They're 3-3 in the conference. We will see who they have coming up. They don't go back to Georgia State, do they? They do. They get Georgia State. All right. Georgia State hammered them last time out. We'll talk about that here in a minute. All right. Let's take a timeout. We've gone over so let's see who won off the top of my head. So South Alabama beat Troy. Georgia Southern beat Coastal Carolina. JMU with an easy win over ULM. And ODU with a 57-point outburst blows out Marshall 91-66. All right, let's take a timeout. When we come back, we will preview the Saturday hoop action and check out the standings in the Sun Belt when we come back. Let me tell you about Gametime. You shouldn't have to worry when you buy tickets to your next big event. Gametime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. See the view from your seat before you buy so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. All-in prices show your total up front so you know you're getting a great deal before you check out. Buy tickets in seconds with 2 taps. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, Dave Schultz, Locked On Sunbelt. Your team every day should mention today, Major Applewhite will be formally introduced. He was actually at the South Alabama basketball game. Jim Nagy from the Senior Bowl was there. Carter Bradley, the former quarterback, also going to be in the Senior Bowl. He was there. They had a nice crowd. That's a nice crowd mentioned a couple of times by the broadcasters because they don't tend to have nice crowds. But it was a nice crowd. It's a rivalry game, Senior Bowl night, so that was good stuff. So we'll Major Applewhite, again, we're trying to get him. He will be formally introduced at an event for the public, I believe 11 a.m. on a Friday. So we'll be looking for that. Maybe tweet out some highlights and stuff. Because the biggest thing here is you got signing day coming up and you got to get some assistant coaches. They are short-staffed. That is for sure. All right, let's check out what is happening on Saturday and in Sunbelt Hoops action. And then we'll go over the standings, see where we are as we head into the weekend. All right. All right, so we mentioned this is actually a Saturday afternoon ball game, so we'll be able to see we'll be able to see a football game later that night, I guess. South Alabama hosting the Cajuns. Both teams 10-8. Both teams 3-3. I'd say both teams are probably not as good as they have been in the past. The Cajuns are your defending champions. They actually beat South Alabama in the Sun Belt Championship last year. Admittedly, watching Richie Riley over the last couple of seasons, it takes him a little bit to figure out what his team is and what they can do. Like last year, they realized they couldn't run it up and down the court, and with about 6 or 7 minutes left to go, they would put it in Isaiah Moore's hands and let him work the magic. All right, Cajuns need to shoot it well, and they need to spread the wealth. They need to have multiple guys score, and I guess that's the same way for South Alabama as we saw against Troy. So that'll be a very good ball game. That's also a nice rivalry game. The Cajuns, by the way, have won 2 in a row on the road. Can they make it 3 out of 4 or 3 straight? They beat Arkansas State last Saturday and took down Texas State relatively easy. And now they're taking on South Alabama, who also has won 2 in a row. All right. Georgia Southern. They are hosting Georgia State. The Eagles got hammered. They have a nice win the other night or last night, but they got demolished by Georgia State 90-62 last week. I presume that game will be much closer. See, we don't have any. See if we got the line. We just don't have any lines just yet because the lines won't be out till Friday. But Georgia Southern 3-3, Georgia State 4-2. If Georgia Southern wants to get into this race for a good seed, they need to win this ballgame. That'll, put them in a relative tie with Georgia State, if not exactly tie, and they'll split the season series. Whereas if Georgia State wins, now they move to 5-2. Georgia Southern drops to 3-4, but then Georgia State has swept Georgia Southern, so they would win any tiebreaker later on in the season. Southern Miss with a big win. Couple of days ago against Arkansas State, as we mentioned, with no Andre Curbelo, although he looked a very sharp dress on the sidelines, and no Victor Hart. We'll see if they, get the anger of Troy, as they're going to be looking for not real revenge on Southern Miss, but because coming off that loss against the Cajuns. So that is a big ball game for Southern Miss because they get Troy at home. That's in 2:30. A lot of these games are during the day. Interesting. South Alabama, Louisiana, 3 Central Time. Georgia State and Georgia Southern also 3 o'clock Central Time. Southern Miss and Troy 2:30. App State hosting Coastal Carolina. App State all of a sudden tied for first in the Sun Belt. They're 5-1. Coastal Carolina coming off a brutal loss where they were beating Georgia Southern all game. They're 2-4. That's at 3:30 Central Time, 4:30 Eastern Time. Texas State has just struggled this year. And just like the JMU ULM ball game, the Texas State Cajuns game was not nearly as close, although in that case, I think the Cajuns did go. In fact, Texas State may have been favored in that ball game. Texas State is struggling. We'll see if Arkansas State, who's 3-3, can turn things around, because they've all of a sudden, I think, have they lost a couple in a row all of a sudden? Like, didn't they start out 3-1? Yeah, they've lost to the Cajuns and Southern Miss. So they started out 3-1. And that ball game is at 4:15 Central Time. JMU hosting Marshall. We mentioned that. All of a sudden, Marshall was hot. They've lost 2 in a row. JMU had lost 2 out of 3 after starting the season undefeated overall, but they get an easy win over ULM. Not only did they get an easy win, and we didn't talk about it as much because focused on the gambling, James Madison shot themselves out of the slump. They finished, the game shooting 51%. They shot 53% in the second half. They were outstanding. Didn't even shot at from 3, 16 to 39. So they were slumping. And so beyond the win, it was more important that maybe they start shooting the ball a little bit better. All right. And then Old Dominion coming off that big win over Marshall. Can they make it 2 in a row? 1-5. They're hosting Monroe 0-6. Should be mentioned that a 5, or I would say a 4-13 Old Dominion team, 0-5 in the Sun Belt, had 6,100 fans in Norfolk. Just saying. I'm just saying. All right, that those fans came out during the week to see Old Dominion. Not a very good basketball team, or at least one that doesn't have a good record. And they have a nice crowd on a Thursday night. So good for them. All right. We'll see what happens when the Cajuns return home on for the next week. And then we'll see what happens with South Alabama. It's going to be tough. NFL playoffs, but we'll see what happens. Should be a good crowd. Could be a good crowd. Saturday afternoon in Mobile. All right. So now I'm starting to think I'm going to go. I'll just go over Saturday morning. Being a day game, I actually could come back, but I don't like doing that. That's a lot of driving. I'm too old to be driving 8 hours in one day. That's just not my thing. All right. Thanks so much for tuning in. It was a great week. We're still trying to get the coaches that are new to the Sun Belt. Honestly, I guess we've struck out with a couple of them already. We'll see what happens with Major Applewhite. And we want to get those Sun Belt players that are heading to the Senior Bowl and Executive Director Jim Nagy to talk about their draft status. So thanks so much for tuning in. It was a great week. Over 1,100 subscribers. That's fantastic. Really do appreciate all the support. Have a great and safe weekend. And we'll be back again on Monday with another edition of Locked On Sunbelt, your team every day.